What's the difference, Katniss? Crushing the enemy in a mine or blowing them out of the sky with one of BD's arrows, it's the same thing.
We were under attack in District 8. And that hovercraft wasn't filled with civilians.
It doesn't matter. Even if those civilians are just mopping floors, they're helping the enemy. And if they have to die, I can live with that. No one who supports the Capitol is innocent.
With that kind of thinking, you can kill whoever you want. You can send kids off to the Hunger Games to keep the districts in line.
That, my friends, is one of the most powerful scenes that I've ever seen in a movie. And it touches on so many movements, on so many things that have gone on in history, the attitude that so many people have endorsed. You're supporting the enemy. You're enabling the enemy. You're working for the enemy. As a nurse, you're healing troops. Therefore, you are supporting the enemy. As a cleaner, you are sweeping floors for the enemy. As someone that has a friend that is the enemy, you are supporting the enemy. Does this sound familiar? Because it sounds very familiar to me. It's a theme that I find that runs across so many movements, particularly the vegan movement. It always happens in war. Anyone that is supporting the enemy deserves to die. You'll often hear of figures in history, whether that's...
There's no in-between. You're either with us or you're with the enemy. That's clear. I will continue to make that clear.
George Bush Jr., I think Obama has made similar arguments, or definitely has adopted that kind of mentality. And it's a very easy thing to say. But when you actually look at this with critical thinking, and you realize the degrees there are, the levels at which you could be supporting the enemy still, it becomes completely insane. It becomes logical insanity. And it's something a lot of people don't want to talk about because they would rather make sweeping generalizations. They'd rather say ridiculous things like,
so, the Hodge twins' response to recognizing they are causing the suffering and death of animals when they consume animal products is, let's only cause the suffering and death of 2 animal species instead of all of them. That's like if Hitler suddenly felt bad about causing the suffering and death of Jews and decided to only put blacks and gypsies into concentration camps as a compromise. Oh my god! I can't believe I've been doing this entire time. Just put the ugly blacks and the smelly gypsies in the gas chambers from now on.
Do you see the problem with this kind of thinking? I do. And it's about good time that I address this. Because the problem is, one of the things that I see in the online community, and one of the things that I see as a general theme throughout so many different social justice issues, is let's only focus on things that can propel the movement. We don't want to speak the truth. We don't want to look at this with honesty and clarity and address the inconsistencies with some of the things that we say, lest it takes away from the strength of our arguments. I'm not about that. I really don't care. Ultimately, I serve Satyagraha, as I keep saying. At least I do when I speak about these issues. Make no mistake about it. I want to see a liberation of human and non-human animals. Because I realize that as long as there are people suffering in this world, to some extent I'm always going to be suffering as well. However, I don't believe in the ends justifies the means mentality. People that follow this kind of thinking will always have a reason to say, do anything they want. And I wanted to make a video addressing some of the gray areas, some of the things that a lot of people don't speak about in social justice movements. And the easiest one for me to address, because I've been part of this thing for a long time, is within the vegan movement. People that make ridiculous statements like, veganism is the moral baseline, or anyone that is not vegan is supporting animal exploitation. And let's be clear about it. It's wrong to be paying these industries. But unlike a lot of people My disagreement, my focus, my anger, my vitriol is towards these organizations that are actually doing these horrible things. The meat industry, that are unnecessarily slaughtering, unnecessarily exploiting the crap out of these animals. The workers that are actually manifesting these horrible actions into reality. Now, it becomes a tricky situation because there are people that are supporting these organizations, and this is what it comes down to. And there are many things that we do throughout society where we are supporting horrible organizations, whether that is supporting child exploitation to some extent, which with all the honesty that I can muster, I don't consider a great injustice. If people have made the decision to work in circumstances because they do not have any better alternatives, and people want to make the argument that they're being exploited, it's exploitation, but it's a very lesser form of exploitation. Nonetheless, people want to make the argument that by you purchasing substances like coltan, which is found within most electronic equipment, from your iPhone to your computer, and because this substance that is mined within the west of Africa, Congo, Sierra Leone, requires the use of kids working horrible long hours and requires some form of exploitation, people want to say that by you purchasing these devices, you are supporting animal exploitation. That by paying tax, you are supporting animal exploitation. Because the reality is, it is not truly obligatory to be paying tax. You can go to other countries where you don't have to pay tax, like Brunei. And when you are paying tax, your monies indirectly are going towards supporting the military industrialized complex. Your monies are going towards subsidizing the cost of meat and dairy. And we can take it to much further levels. We can see how by supporting organizations, our dollars are supporting these organizations and are therefore leading to the perpetuation of evil, for lack of a better word. And once you understand this, you understand the many forms of exploitation, you realize it really isn't fair to be making statements like this. Without a doubt, we should be striving towards moving away from the iniquities of this world, and our money shouldn't be going towards these organizations. But to be making statements like whether people deserve to live if they are supporting these organizations by the purchase of these foods, which Freely Banana did not that long ago, it's not acceptable and it's not fair. It really isn't. Without a doubt, we should abolish these organizations. I would make the argument, though, that the focus should be put towards preventing the people that are actually working in these organizations, that are actually manifesting the harm, that are actually killing these animals. Putting down these establishments. And yes, without a doubt, we should be putting pressure on people that are supporting these organizations, but also have some perspective and realize that you to some extent are complicit in this. I don't feel comfortable saying things that are, quite frankly, not true and bullshit, with the argument that it's leading towards creating more and more good. I don't have a problem with showing some harsh love, but I do have a problem with assigning blame when it is not fair and it is not appropriate, particularly when I myself to some extent am complicit in the industry. And what I love about this video is it illustrates that extremist mentality that a lot of people can take on, that anyone that is supporting this organization, regardless of what level it is, whether or not you're sweeping floors, whether or not you're a nurse, whether or not you are some kind of relief worker, and you are trying to alleviate the pain that animals are experiencing in welfare. There are forms of welfare where people are simply trying to reduce the suffering. They're simply trying to better the food and the conditions of these animals. for someone to make the argument that you were supporting animal exploitation with that kind of statement, it's completely ridiculous, absurd, and quite frankly, I don't have any tolerance for it. Because whereas I want to be as diplomatic as I can, I want to speak with emotional correctness, it is very hard to do when you hear something that is unassailably wrong. You compromise yourself when you're not willing to speak the truth. And it's this extremist mentality that I think a lot of people tend to take. I don't know if it's a lot, but it's definitely something that I see echoed on the internet. It's easier to support that kind of attitude because it angers people up. People want to share things that fire them up. That's why a lot of the times you see the most controversial, the most hate-filled, the most ridiculous shit reaching the most amount of views. That's why people like Vegan Gains can have such a massive following. Whether or not they're effective, that's arguable. That is arguable. There are many people that I'm sure watch the information, but whether or not they change their actions, whether or not they're affected by the vitriolic, negative, unfair, and blatantly stupid arguments that are sometimes made, is still to be questioned. And I would just invite people to consider these things, to try to broaden your perspective on these things. Ultimately, people want to say that you're not being an activist because you're bringing attention to the inconsistencies. Well, I don't really care. As I keep saying, I'm simply trying to be a purveyor of truth, not just a purveyor of awesome vibes and trying to make people feel good about themselves. I'm trying to get people to critically look at the things that they are saying, look at their approach, and see whether or not it is not only effective, but whether or not it is true and it resonates with their heart. I mean, we can create a list of so many of the problems within veganism that we are complicit in. I don't think I need to do that, but I will if people really want me to outline this stuff. Whether or not it's... One of the things that I find very frustrating is people become so dogmatically attached to the ideas inherent within veganism that as opposed to looking at a situation for whether or not it is exploitative, whether or not it is right, they simply want to attach to the dogmatic notion because that is the notion that they've attached themselves to. For instance, backyard eggs. Now let's be very clear. I don't eat eggs. I do not consume animal products. However, the idea of a situation where people are using the eggs of a chicken, which, by the way, I've been in these environments. I have neighbors that have actually used backyard eggs. The chickens are in no distress, and quite frankly, they don't give a shit. I don't care about the arguments people want to make that chickens are still, in certain situations, going to eat their eggs, therefore it's better to feed it back to them. The reality is those chickens don't care. They're not being exploited. And to make the argument that they're being commodified because you are gaining something from them is completely ridiculous. It's ridiculous because if you apply that notion on everything that goes on in the world, whether it's having guide dogs, whether it's having people work for you on any level, it's very easy to make the argument that you're exploiting them, that you're using something for a purpose, even though your intentions may be you want to take care of that animal. But to make the argument that it is somehow wrong, I mean, fair enough if you want to say it is not vegan by definition, but it's irrelevant. I don't care what words you want to use over here. I mean, this thing ultimately comes down to non-violence, ahimsa, which is what we're trying to perpetuate. The idea of using the eggs of a chicken is not causing any harm. And if people want to do that, even though it's bad for them, just like if people want to smoke cigarettes, just like if people want to do a whole bunch of other things, I, with the same kind of intensity, would respect their right to do that because it's their right. There are many things that I don't like the idea of, but I simply champion because it's the right thing to do. And believe it or not, as much as I don't like the idea of having sex with guys, I think it's fucking disgusting. I would fight with absolute intensity for the rights of gay people to have sex with each other. And I would fight for the rights of women to have equal rights, regardless of whether or not I was a woman, because it has to do with justice. And I find a lot of the times the arguments people make within not just the vegan movement, within the feminist movement, within a lot of religious organizations are made because they want to be in adherence 100% to their ideology, even though their ideology may not be valid on that point. I ask you to consider something in of itself, whether or not that thing is right, not because it is in line with your ideology. I never have looked at things along that perspective. That's one of the reasons why I've never adopted any religion, because I have no religion. There is no religion higher than truth. That is essentially what I look at every single time I look at an issue. I put aside what I want. I put aside what has been done in the past. I look at whether or not it is fair. I put myself in that situation. I ask myself, is it just? That's what we should be doing. I don't care about labels. I don't care what the majority of the public think in regards to truth and morality. And pay attention to the fact that I use that. Of course I care what people think about me to some extent. I want people to like me, but not at the cost of compromising what I hold to be true. That's what principles are about. That which comes first. It's the kind of logical insanity that people want to adopt that allows them to forego principles. This is a common theme we find in war. One of the things that I remember reading about the Second World War is how the Allied forces, Winston Churchill, his people would often make concessions to do the most abominable acts because they believed it would reduce the length of the war. For instance, using firebombing the cities because they believed it would put pressure on the enemy to give up. And these were a horrible thing in their time. I mean, from my understanding, they would create these firestorms. Somehow the air around the fire would be all sucked up and create these massive whirlwinds, increasing the heat, and people would be in the most painful situations. And it would cause many, many deaths. And they did this, and they chose to use weapons, chose to use tactics that were unjust. They chose to involve civilians, do what is wrong because they believed it would eventually bring about an end. This logical insanity that we see in warfare. And I understand that war is not a pretty thing, but when we're willing to compromise all principles, compromise anything in order to do that, we become that which we are fighting. And I don't take pleasure in saying a lot of this stuff. I realize that it's not hard to hear. If anyone is still listening to this, I'm sure I must have hit upon a nerve at some point. But the reality is that it's necessary sometimes to hear something that is the truth. It's easy to say things that everyone agrees with. But if you truly want to change the world, sometimes you have to speak the truth. Sometimes you have to say things and invite people to question their certitudes. And that is what I'm all about. With all the humility that I can muster, one of the things that I love to do is question the shit out of anything. I will never rest on my laurels. I will never rest on an ideology purely because I have embraced that ideology. I don't care if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I will quickly admit it and move on. However, I won't fall into the humility trap, and in the interests of humility, not say that which I know to be right with all the certainty that I am saying now. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave this video here, and I'd invite you to consider just the length at which you want to take things, and invite you to have some more compassion and insight into some of the things that you say. I know that it's hard when you're so full of frustration and pain. You want to direct the anger towards anyone. But sometimes I feel that that anger is not fairly directed. And it's incumbent upon all of us to champion truth and to strive to make a change in the world, but without compromising our principles and without being douchebags. So, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, peace out, keep it real, don't drive and text, boom shakalaka, keep making boom those ethical gains, y'all. That's what I'm talking about.
Life's purpose is to feel joy. Metaphysical, lyrical, saying enough for truth. The only one to make change is walking in your shoes. Be the example, don't complain about the news. Making music and serving the world with the loo. Now you can be the same, or you can be the change. Find strength from inside, break through the chains. No one to blame, nothing to prove. You create your reality, it's up to you.